Hey everyone, welcome to Live Streaming Basics with Go Fish Media. Over the past several months, as you guys can imagine, we have been having a lot of conversations with churches from around the country who are just diving into live streaming for the first time. And a lot of churches are uncertain about where to start, even. And for those who have started researching, they're just not quite sure how to put everything together. So, we wanted to put together a presentation to kind of cover the basics for you guys, give you an idea of what you'll need to live stream. And something important to understand is that there are a lot of different ways to do this, but Go Fish Media has been working with churches specifically, helping them with live streaming for more than a decade. And we've found a number of solutions and a certain type of configuration that works really well for churches. And so that's what we're going to be sharing with you today. Just know that the way we describe doing this is obviously not the only way, but it is a proven method that works incredibly well. We have a ton of churches successfully streaming every week using a setup like what we're going to discuss. So let's jump right into it, and we're going to start with just a quick overview of the topics that we're going to cover, which would be the key components that are necessary for any live stream. And I'm just going to go through these real quickly, and then we'll break down each section in more detail as we go along. So the key components to a good live stream are good upload speed, a computer, not just any computer, but a computer built specifically for this purpose, camera or cameras, capture device and or switcher, good audio, then incorporating your worship presentation software with your live stream to create an engaging presentation online the same way you would in your sanctuary. And then streaming software is important. That's how you encode your video before it gets sent out to your streaming platform, Facebook Live or YouTube Live. And then the last thing we're going to cover is more of an optional component. It's called a CDN, or a content distribution network, and we'll talk about why that could be beneficial towards the end here. So let's jump into it. So what is a good upload speed for streaming? So you have to realize a good live streaming setup has to meet two critical requirements. So the first thing is you've got to have the right hardware that's powerful enough to render and encode your video, audio, and graphics simultaneously. And we're gonna touch on that and break that down a little bit more here in a moment. But the second, you need a good upload speed, and I would argue that that is perhaps paramount to anything else, because I mean you could have the best hardware available, but without a good upload speed, you're never going to be able to get that content online to your audience. So, so again, what is a good upload speed for streaming? It's kind of a complicated question, but you want a speed that allows you to stream all your content, audio, video, graphics, at a quality resolution to the platform of your choice without experiencing any major problems. So, and you also want to make sure that you have a speed fast enough to allow for any fluctuations in your bandwidth. Obviously, internet speeds are never an absolute constant, but you want to make sure that you have enough headroom that your speeds never dip below whatever the minimum requirements are for your chosen streaming platform at the resolution you'll be streaming. So even though internet speeds are going to vary a lot depending on where you guys are located, we generally recommend a minimum of 5 to 10 megabits per second upload for streaming to Facebook Live or YouTube Live at 720p 30 frames per second. If you're streaming at 1080p 60 or higher, which is really only possible on YouTube, Facebook limits it to 1080p 60. But we recommend that you shoot for 15 to 20 megabits per second minimum for that kind of quality. So, and if you guys ever need to, if you're not sure what your upload speed is, just go to speedtest.net and you can quickly find out exactly what your current upload speed is. And if it's not fast enough, I recommend talking with your ISP, your internet service provider, to find out if there are faster speeds available at your location. And if not, you may have to start shopping a little bit. But this is a critical piece before you get into the rest of it, because there's nothing worse than spending thousands of dollars on new equipment, getting everything in place, only to find that you can't get that content outside your walls. So next I want to talk about computers. And this is another critical component, because this is the workhorse driving everything for your live stream. So some of you may already know this, some of you may already have these systems, but Go Fish Media has been building custom computers for over 14 years. And we started with presentation systems, and a little over a decade ago transitioned to being able to provide systems that handle recording, streaming, and even IMAG, which is live video presentation within the building at very low latency. But regardless of whether you have one of our systems or you plan to use your own or build your own, here is a list of our recommended specifications for a streaming computer. So you want at least an i7 quad-core processor. You're going to want 16 gigs of memory. We recommend a 500 gigabyte solid-state hard drive at a minimum. And then you really want a dedicated video card. NVIDIA or AMD is fine. We've used both. We currently prefer NVIDIA. But you want a video card that has at least 2 gigs of video memory. And then the last thing you're going to want is either an SDI, HDMI, or USB capture device, which we're going to talk more about capture devices here in just a bit. But those are the core specifications that we recommend for any streaming computer. So let's move on to cameras, and let's talk about what type of camera you should use and how you're going to determine what camera is best. So when you guys are getting ready to choose a camera, you've got obviously a number of different options, and really the type of camera that you guys decide on is really going to depend on a few things. Obviously your budget, but then also the size of your media team and the level of experience that media team has. Those all play a factor in deciding what type of device you're going to use. But as long as your camera has excuse me, a USB, HDMI, or SDI output, it will work with the setup we're going to show you. So the type of cameras that I want to break down for you here in this next section are going to be camcorders. These are going to be the lowest cost and also the lowest quality. Well, the only thing lower than that would be like a webcam, but these are low cost, low quality. And then we're going to talk about PTZ cameras, which are medium cost and a good quality. And then we'll touch on broadcast cameras, which are much higher cost, but they are the highest quality. So let's start with camcorders. And camcorders are going to range in price from about $200 up to around $1,000, and these are your traditional consumer level type camcorders. Most people are familiar with this type of camera or have used this type of camera, or you may own one of these cameras already. So some of the pros of using a camcorder: they're inexpensive, so that's obviously a plus. They're simple to set up and use. They are mobile because they are fairly compact. And they often, well, almost always have built-in recording via some type of flash storage like an SD card. Some of the cons, though, of using a camcorder is that these type of cameras have a lower image quality because of the fact that they use small image sensors. So keep that in mind. These are not designed really for large venue type recording, and they're not designed to handle low light situations very well in most cases. And then the other thing is they have a limited optical zoom range. So, some of them will go up to 20 or 30x, but a lot of camcorders are going to use a combination of optical and digital zoom. And when you start using digital zoom, you run into, image degradation and pixelization the further you try to zoom in. So the last thing that is I would put in the cons list for camcorders is that unless you have someone manning the camera, you're left with a static image. You can't control these remotely, and they're not dynamic. So that's kind of the pros and cons of camcorders. But if you are a church that already has this type of camera in place, and your budget doesn't allow for anything more at the time, then these will work. Just know that you're going to have, I guess just know what to expect, and that is some of the things that we just talked about. So now I want to talk about PTZ cameras. These are more of a mid-range camera. I really like these kind of cameras, and they are going to start in about the $1,700 price range, and they go up to around $2,400 depending on which type of PTZ camera you're using. And some of the pros of these cameras is that they use a much larger image sensor than a camcorder, and so they will provide a very clear image up to 1080p 60 frames per second. Most PTZ cameras aren't using 4K yet. There are some out there on the market, but they're not widely available, at least not yet. The next thing about PTZ cameras that I really like is that you have full pan, tilt, and zoom capability. These are controlled remotely over your network, so you have the ability to pan left, right, up, down with a wide range of motion, and it allows you to control exactly where the camera is pointed, and you can even control zoom remotely. These cameras come in HDMI, USB, SDI, or NDI output options, so you've got a lot of flexibility in how you want to connect the camera to the rest of your system. And I touched on this a second ago, but because they are on your network, you can control multiple cameras from one location, so a single operator can easily control multiple cameras at the same time. And this makes these type of cameras really ideal for churches. And once they're set up, they're very easy to operate. So these check a lot of boxes for churches. These are our favorite type of cameras, mostly because of the quality and the cost. And that combination works incredibly well for our customers. There are a couple cons, I guess, for these type of cameras. And one is that the lenses aren't interchangeable. So whatever lens option you choose is what you're stuck with unless you replace that camera down the road. So I would caution that you want to make sure you know exactly where this camera is going to be installed and what kind of distance that camera has to throw to get to the platform, so you make the right choice the first time. And then the other thing is they don't have onboard recording, but for the type of setup that we're going to be talking about, that's really not necessary. So the last thing that we'll talk about here is broadcast cameras. Now, broadcast cameras are, like I said, the highest quality option here, and they're going to start in a price range at the low end about $3,500, and then they go up to well over $10,000 depending on how fancy you get, what type of lenses you're using, what your setup looks like. And some of the pros of these cameras, some of these may seem obvious, but these are the highest quality image with resolutions up to, on most cameras, 5K. Some now are even going higher than 5K, but 5K is pretty common among this type of camera. And this type of camera uses interchangeable lens mounts, so this allows you to use any type of glass you want for your camera. So you can use, whether it's Canon, Nikon, Leica, doesn't matter, any type of cinema or prime lens can be mounted onto these type of cameras and allow you for crazy amounts of zoom, complete control over your focal range, and all sorts of things. So they also have built-in camera controls. So these type of cameras allow you to adjust things like your color settings, your iris settings, your ISO. All that can be adjusted on the camera. And they also have talkback capabilities. So if you're in a studio type environment and you're sending the signal back to a control room, you can communicate with the control room from the camera. Um, and they have a larger capacity for onboard recording, so you can mount actual hard drives to these and record very large amounts of video um, in a single recording. And they also have the ability to attach a viewfinder, so the camera operator can see exactly what they're shooting and frame the shot according to that viewfinder. So these are all big pros for this type of camera. If you're looking for the highest quality, professional production. On the con side of things, though, for most churches, this type of camera is going to be very expensive. And if you're on a limited budget, my opinion is that your money is better spent elsewhere. Get a mid-range type camera like a PTZ, and then spend the rest of your money on good additional auxiliary type hardware like switchers and cabling and in your computer and everything else like that. And then the other thing about this type of camera is it does require an experienced operator. These are not controlled remotely. They require someone manning that device and someone that knows what they're doing. You can't just stick an inexperienced, non-technical volunteer on this type of camera and expect a good outcome. So now that we've talked about a few different types of cameras, hopefully that helps you kind of narrow it down and understand what to expect with that um, and what's going to work best for your church. But once you've chosen your camera or cameras, the next step is you have to be able to capture that signal. So in order to get that video signal from your camera to your streaming platform, you've got to be able to capture it onto your streaming computer. And something that I think a lot of people don't realize, unless you've been in the world of hardware and computers, is that most computers are designed to output video or output graphics. So when you look at the connections on the back of a PC, any HDMI, VGA, DisplayPort or DVI connection is going to be an output signal. It's meant to send content outward. Computers are not normally designed to ingest video. So that's where a capture device comes in. A video capture device is designed specifically to ingest, raw video, so it can be processed and used in whatever way you plan, in this case, to live stream. So capture devices can be either internal, which would be a PCI Express card that attaches to your motherboard, or external, which are going to be either USB 3 or Thunderbolt. If you're using a PC, then they're all going to be USB 3.0 generally. So if you're using multiple cameras, in addition to or sometimes in place of, depending on what type of switcher you'd be using, you would want to capture everything onto a switcher before you bring it into your computer. So we'll talk about switchers in just a moment, but for capture devices, we'll break this down a little bit further. And like I said, we're going to talk about internal capture cards, which we prefer capture devices made by either Blackmagic Design or Magwell. And then we're going to talk about external capture devices, which again, we prefer Blackmagic Design or Magwell. And then we'll talk about video switchers. And although we have a lot of churches successfully using switchers from Roland or Kramer or Data Video, a variety of other ones, we prefer Blackmagic Design. Anything in their ATEM family, these switchers are incredibly powerful for the amount of money that you'll be spending, and they just offer a lot of features and benefits, and they play well with other equipment. They work well with a wide variety of equipment, and we've had great success with those devices. So let's talk a little bit more about internal capture cards. This is what an internal capture card would look like. This is one example. But like we talked about on the last slide, this type of card is installed internally using an available PCI Express slot on your motherboard. And something that I will caution about with regard to internal capture cards is that these type of cards are are very powerful cards and require a lot of resources from the system that they're being installed into. And so not every card is compatible with just any motherboard. So I would caution you guys that if you're looking at, you know, building your own system or doing your own thing, that you check with the manufacturer to ensure your motherboard is compatible with this device, with any of these devices before making a purchase and before installing anything. Um, because they're expensive. They're going to range in price from $250 up to $1,000, and it would be a shame to spend that kind of money and install it and then not have it work. So, um, but if you are, looking at doing it yourself, just know there are a lot of different options. There are cards that have, single input, multiple inputs, inputs and outputs for capture and playback, and a wide variety. So, but typically this type of card is only going to be used if either you're custom building your streaming computer and know what you're doing, or if you're purchasing a pre-configured streaming system like one of the ones that we build. So let's talk about the other option, which would be external capture cards. So if you have a system that meets a lot of the minimum requirements that we listed at the beginning of this presentation, and you just want to add the ability to capture video, that's the only piece that's missing, and you don't want to mess with, you know, getting inside your computer and installing hardware, then an external capture device works really well. These are plug and play. Like I said, they're USB 3. We really like this device that's pictured as a Blackmagic design Intensity Shuttle. This device allows you to pull video in either via HDMI or a variety of analog signals like RCA, S video, or component. So this is just one of the external capture devices out there. Really, for PC users, this is the only Blackmagic design external capture device that they make. If you are using Magwell, on the other hand, they have a bunch of different either SDI or HDMI external capture devices that you can look at. And these type of devices are going to range on the low end from about $145 to as much as almost $1,000 again. So that allows you to capture your video, right? So once you bring your video signal from your camera or cameras into this device, you've now successfully captured it. So let's talk a little bit more though about switchers. So what happens if you have multiple cameras? For the type of system that we're talking about, what we found to work best for churches is if you are using multiple cameras, bring them into an external switcher first before bringing that signal, that final program output, into your streaming computer so you can switch externally. So these type of switchers, and here are three Blackmagic design switchers that we use that all work really well. So we've got at the top Blackmagic ATEM Television Studio Pro HD, which is a console type switcher. You notice you've got a T-bar slider and all your buttons and knobs and everything, and a built-in LCD on that console. And then the one below that is an ATEM Television Studio HD, which is exactly like the one above it, just a compact rack mountable version. So it has the exact same number of inputs, outputs, multi-view, auxiliary program, same controls, same LCD screen. The only difference is some of the controls that you see on the console above it are only available within the software interface for that switcher. Both switchers are great. Those are high-end switchers that allow for SDI and HDMI inputs and outputs. And then the one on the very bottom is the ATEM Mini. That's actually the Mini Pro, and that device is also great. It's super compact, smaller than a keyboard, and it allows for 4 HDMI inputs and then an HDMI output or a USB output. So this actually, that type of switcher eliminates the need for a capture device because it connects to your computer like a webcam, um, and that's kind of cool. So that's the, I guess, the more budget friendly option. Or if you're really in a tight space, that could work. Otherwise, the switchers above are probably going to be better switchers for the type of setup that we're talking about. Um, so these are going to range in price from as low as $295 for the regular A10 Mini, all the way up to about almost $3,000 for the ATEM Television Studio 4K switcher. So, and if you guys are curious about these a little bit more, you can actually find some of these listed on our website at gofishmedia.net. We're resellers for Blackmagic Design. We're an authorized dealer. So anything that Blackmagic Design makes is available through us, and their pricing is a lot like Apple. It is going to be the same no matter where you go. But yeah, so that's your switcher. And so, like I said, it really depends on how you plan to set things up and if you want to be using more than one camera. If you're using a single camera, then this isn't necessary, but can be added on later if you decide to expand. If you're starting out with several cameras, then I would definitely recommend looking at one of these options and considering uh, making external switching part of your workflow. So let's move on now that we've figured out how to, what type of computer we need, what type of cameras we want, and how we're bringing it into our streaming computer. Let's talk about the next element, which is also critical, and this is audio. Having a great image with terrible audio um, is almost as bad as not having anything. So, you know, once you get that video and everything into your computer, you're going to need to find a way to bring audio in and mix that together. Um, and the nice thing is, most churches already have, you already have a sound system in place. Um, and so bringing that sound into your computer for streaming is actually pretty simple. If you're using an older analog console, all you have to do is send an auxiliary out to a USB audio interface to give you an element of control so you can have a unique mix going into your computer. And those usually connect via USB to your streaming computer. And then you can pull in an independent audio source for your live stream. And if you're using a digital soundboard, then digital soundboards have that option built in. Usually you have the option to create a completely separate mix and send it out via USB or send it out and bring it into the microphone in uh, on the PC. So just know that it's important to have a separate mix for live streaming. Don't assume that the mix you're using in-house, during your worship services is going to be good enough for your live stream. So next thing that I want to talk about is worship presentation software. So a lot of you guys are using SongShow Plus, and some of you may be using other worship presentation software programs, and that's okay too. There are a lot of them out there that do similar things, but one of the keys to creating an engaging live stream is not just having video and audio, right? I mean, if that was the case, if all you were looking for was video and audio, you can almost do that with an iPhone or an iPad. Some of you obviously are doing that, and there's nothing wrong with that, just for the sake of staying connected. But you may have noticed that that's a bit lacking, right? And then audio is not great when you're using a mobile device. So being able to incorporate your worship presentation software and the graphics you're sending out to your sanctuary, lyrics and whatnot, being able to pull that in to a live stream creates a much more engaging and dynamic presentation for your online audience. So you can incorporate things like, countdown timers um, before the service starts, or what I like to do is um, find some cool trivia videos, just to help keep people engaged, and instead of watching a timer count down, there's actually questions that draw them in and cause them to pay attention, right? Um, but then you can incorporate lower thirds lyrics during your worship service or sermon. You can display sermon illustration videos, and slideshows, things like that. Um, and so here in a moment, we're going to talk about streaming software. And streaming software is what allows you to kind of pull in all these different elements, right? So your video, your audio, and then also your worship presentation, um, and you can do it either via screen capture if you're um, if you're running your software on the same computer, or you can use NDI, which allows you to configure um, kind of a virtual output from your worship presentation software program over the network. And NDI is great because if your software allows for it, like SongShow does, you can use alpha channel transparency and relegate your text to lower thirds. And then when you pull it into your streaming software, there's nothing else to do. You don't have to key anything out. You just lay it over top of your video, and you've got a perfectly integrated text and video composite. Um, so on this next slide here, we'll show an example of what that looks like. So here's an example of a video. Obviously, this is a still, but capturing video of pastor during the sermon, and there's a scripture reference up on the screen with some transparency behind it, and doesn't interfere with our view of the pastor, but it allows us to follow along and stay engaged. So let's talk a little bit more about streaming software. And streaming software is, like I said before, what allows you to mix all this stuff together. And then also, very importantly, it also is responsible for encoding your video, which is a method of compressing that video and preparing it to be sent out to an online platform like Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Vimeo, or your own website, and a variety of other places. And your streaming software, the ones we're going to talk about, will also record your service, and they'll do it simultaneously. And if you're using a powerful enough computer like the ones that we're talking about, and that meet the recommended specification from earlier, then you can easily record and stream at the exact same time. And as soon as you're done, your stream stops, your recording stops, and everything is done, compressed, fully rendered, and ready to use however you need to. So the most common streaming programs on the market, the three most popular, um, especially among churches, is going to be OBS Studio, which is a free piece of software. It's available on Mac or PC, and that software, um, it does the core functions of encoding and recording, and it allows you to stream out to Facebook and YouTube. It even has NDI support. However, open broadcaster software is not developed as regularly as the next couple that we're going to talk about, because it is freeware, and that means development does not have the funds to be constantly expanding and adding on new features, and it's limited in terms of features compared to some of the other premium streaming softwares. So the other one is Wirecast. Wirecast is one that some of you may already be using. We used Wirecast for years and years, and it's a great piece of software. It does start at $599 for a studio license. It is available on Mac or PC, and it is very robust in terms of features, and and overall a pretty solid program. But then the other one that's very popular and you may have heard of is vMix. And we have recently switched over to vMix in our systems. Nothing against Wirecast. vMix is just has a less expensive option that works for a lot of our churches, and of course can be upgraded to a higher license if a church feels the need for it. Um, but it's every bit as robust as Wirecast and offers just as many features. And so, and vMix is a PC only software program. So keep that in mind depending on how you guys are set up. But these are the three software programs that we're familiar with, and that we feel comfortable telling churches, yeah, these are all great programs to use. And then, like I said, obviously we prefer vMix, just because of the combination of cost, features, ease of use, and their support team. Um, and like I said, we use Wirecast for a long time, and it still works well. It's just the most expensive option out of these three. So, so now we've gotten our cameras, um, captured into the computer. We've determined whether or not we need a switcher, and and we've talked about bringing our audio in, and now we've talked about streaming software and how this allows us to mix everything together. And this is the software that is kind of one of the final steps. This is what sends everything out and gets you guys live, gets you online with your audience. And so the last thing I want to talk about in terms of these components is more of an optional one. So this is a CDN. So we touched on this at the very beginning. A CDN, or content delivery network, also known as a restreaming service, is a service that is going to allow you to send a single stream to their servers and then let them distribute that out to all the different platforms that you want that content displayed on. So while all the software programs we just talked about, vMix, OBS, and Wirecast, they all have the ability to allow for multiple live streams being sent out simultaneously. So you could configure an output for YouTube, an output for Facebook, and an output for, say, Vimeo, all within the same software program. However, just keep in mind that that requires a significant amount of bandwidth to do that. Each stream that you're sending out is going to be using, anywhere from, depending on what resolution you're streaming at, probably anywhere from about 3 or 4 megabits per second to over 10 or 11. And then you start adding those all up, and you can see how you may start running into problems if you don't have an incredibly fast upload speed, or if there's a lot of fluctuation in your internet speeds during the course of a service. By using a restreaming service, you're sending just that one signal to their servers, and then they have an entire network of servers, and they have the bandwidth and the power to be able to send that out over multiple platforms, and guarantee you speed and quality of delivery. And then a few other options, or I guess advantages with a restreaming service, is that you also get some things like the ability to schedule your live events. So if you wanted to, you could pre-record content, send it to a restreaming service like Restream.io, by the way, which is one that we highly recommend. But Restream.io lets you send the content to them, and then you can schedule when that content will go live on your different social networks. And then another feature that's really cool about something like Restream.io is, let's say you are streaming to multiple social platforms at once, and let's just, for example, say you're streaming to YouTube and Facebook at the same time. And if you want to engage with your congregation online, live in real time, typically that means you'd have to be signed into your Facebook account and your YouTube account, and be going back and forth and keeping an eye on those to respond to comments and give feedback and whatnot. With Restream.io, they have the ability to, it's a really cool feature where you can take your chat from all your different platforms and condense it down into a single window and monitor everything from one screen. And that's a big advantage. So this type of service is a paid service. Um, we are not affiliated with this company, so we're just giving an example of one that we have experience with and that we can recommend. But I just wanted you guys to be aware of that option, because there are some definite benefits, but it is not required to get you guys online. You can easily produce your live stream week after week without using something like this, but I wanted you to be aware of it. So now it's time to kind of let's bring this all together and visually take a look at kind of what this looks like all set up and all these pieces together, right? So here we have, so you got your cameras going into a switcher, and the switcher is feeding that signal into your streaming computer. Your audio console is feeding audio to your streaming computer. And then on that streaming computer, you're using SongShow Plus or whatever worship presentation software you're using to generate all your graphic content, right? Lyrics and scriptures and videos and slideshows and images, and sending that out locally, obviously, to your projectors and whatnot, but also um, you're sending it to your streaming software, and then your streaming software like vMix is taking all of this and pulling it together, right? So it's taking your cameras coming in from the switcher, it's taking your audio coming in either via USB or through your sound card, and it's taking your graphic content from your worship presentation software, and it's combining everything and mixing it all together to give you the final product. And then it's taking that rendered or that composited content, and it's compressing it and encoding it to be sent out to the live streaming platform of your choice. And that's the flow. That's what it looks like. And of course, there are maybe a couple variations here and there depending on your setup, but that's the gist of it. That's the setup that we recommend, and that's the setup we have tons and tons of churches using successfully every week. And that's what we found works really well for the average sized church, and the kind of thing that we'd be happy to talk to you guys about. So, I guess this kind of brings us to a close here, but just understand that we get it. This is complicated stuff, and the more you start to learn about it, the further down the rabbit hole you go, and the more you realize how complicated it really it can be. And so that can be overwhelming, and we understand that. But we exist to simplify that process for you. We have spent years of trial and error and working with so many different configurations and setups and churches and volunteers and media teams of all different experience levels. And those years of experience have helped us to kind of narrow it down to, to more easily identify what kind of solution is going to work for your church after a conversation with you and understanding what your vision is, what your current situation is, what your budget is. So don't worry. That's the kind of thing that we can help with. So I guess all that to say, if after looking at everything in this presentation, you guys are still feeling like you need help piecing it all together, or if you're at a point where you're ready to move forward and start putting together your system, and you need to know exactly where to get that equipment and need to talk through a few details, that's what we're here for. So feel free to reach out to us, and we will gladly discuss that further with you. We'll help you flesh out your vision and figure out exactly what equipment is needed to get you there. We can build quotes and get you pricing so you know exactly what to expect with that. And as I mentioned a couple times throughout the presentation, we're authorized dealers for a lot of these brands that we've discussed. All the products that we've mentioned are products that we are able to provide. And then not only that, but on the back end of it too. So the cool thing about Go Fish Media is that we don't just sell equipment and then we're on our merry way. Um, our support goes beyond the sale too. We have the ability to offer remote training and integration to help you get your equipment all set up once you receive it. The ability to train your media team so they understand how to use all this new equipment, and then some ongoing support on the back end as you guys move forward. So we would love to talk to you guys about it. But if nothing else, I hope this has allowed you guys to get a more clear picture, wrap your head around the whole process a bit better. And if you have any questions, definitely get in touch with us. Um, Give us a call at our toll-free number here, or send us an email. Either way, and we would love to answer any questions you might have and get in touch with you. So that concludes this portion of the presentation, and I look forward to sharing some of the new features of 9.1 in a separate video. So thank you guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.